was a kind and gentle person, honest and unaffected, and often people would come to him and ask him to settle their quarrels. He came to be regarded as a wise and holy man, and one day the father of Rabbi Abraham Gershon of the city of Brody came to him and asked him to settle a business dispute he had with another man. He was so impressed with Israel that he offered to give him his daughter Hannah in marriage. Israel agreed, but asked that the betrothal documents be kept a secret for the time being. And now, an interesting event occurred. The father of Hannah died, and Israel traveled to Brody, to the house of the great Rabbi Abraham Gershon, Hannah's brother, in order to claim his bride. He was dressed in the clothes of a peasant, torn boots and coarse garments, and you can imagine how shocked the rabbi was when he saw the betrothal agreement in Israel's hand. His sister should marry a peasant? What shame and dishonor that would bring upon the family name. He tried to persuade his sister to reject her father's choice, but somehow Hannah saw something in Israel which the good rabbi of Brody did not, and she refused. After their marriage, Rabbi Abraham Gershon tried to improve his brother-in-law's education. He began by teaching him Talmud, but Israel seemed very uninterested in Talmud. He made him his coachman, but Israel was a failure at that too. Finally, the rabbi gave up and ordered his sister and brother-in-law to leave Brody so as not to dishonor his good name, and they left. And now, Reuben, you will begin to have the answer to your question. I am sorry I'm taking so long. Please go on, Abba. All right. Israel and his wife left Brody and settled in the Carpathian Mountains in a village near Brody. They were very poor but very happy. Israel earned a living by selling the lime which they dug in the mountains. The Carpathian Mountains are beautiful, and Israel built a little house and spent many days there alone, praying, dreaming, and singing to the great hills. Very often he would remain alone throughout the entire week and return to his wife Hannah only for Shabbat. She must have suffered terribly because of their poverty, but she believed in him and was very devoted. Reuben, it was in these mountains that Israel gave birth to Hasidism. He was there many years, thinking, meditating, singing his strange songs, listening to the birds, learning from peasant women how to heal sicknesses with grasses and herbs, to write amulets, to drive out evil spirits. The people of the village loved him, and soon his reputation as a holy man began to spread throughout all of Poland. Legends began to grow about him. He was not yet 40, and already there were legends about him. You can imagine what kind of person he must have been. His brother-in-law, Rabbi Abraham Gershon, finally regretted his cruelty and asked Israel and Hannah to return to Brody. He acquired a tavern for them to operate, but it was Hannah who really managed it, while Israel wandered about in the woods and meadows outside of Brody, meditating. Finally, he began to travel, and he became a Baal Shem. He was kind and saintly and godly, and he seemed to want to help people, not for the money they paid him, but for the love he had for them. And so they came to call him the Baal Shem Tov, the kind or good master of the name. He mingled with the people and talked to them about God and his Torah in plain, simple language that they could easily understand. He taught them that the purpose of man is to make his life holy. Every aspect of his life, eating, drinking, praying, sleeping. God is everywhere, he told them, and if it seems at times that he is hidden from us, it is only because we have not yet learned to seek him correctly. Evil is like a hard shell. Within this shell is the spark of God, his goodness. How do we penetrate the shell? By sincere and honest prayer, by being happy, and by loving all people. The Baal Shem Tov, his followers later shortened his name and called him the Besht, believed that no man is so sinful that he cannot be purified by love and understanding. He also believed, and here is where he brought down upon himself the rage of the learned rabbis, that the study of Talmud was not very important, that there need not be fixed times for prayers, that God could be worshipped through a sincere heart, through joy and singing and dancing. In other words, Reuben, he opposed any form of mechanical religion. There was nothing new in what he taught. You will find it all in the Bible, Talmud, and Kabbalah. But he gave it a special emphasis and taught it at a key time to people who were hungry for this kind of teaching. And these people listened and loved him. Many great rabbis came to mock him and went away converted to his way of thinking. When he died, his followers opened their own synagogues. Before the end of that century, about half of Eastern European Jewry consisted of Hasidism, as his followers were called, pious ones. So great was the need of the masses for a new way to approach God. There was another man born in that century, Rabbi Elijah of Vilna, a great Talmudist, a genius, and a strong opponent of Hasidism. But even his opposition could not stop Hasidism from growing. It flourished and became a great movement in Jewish life. For a long time there was terrible bitterness between the Mitnagdim, the opponents of Hasidism, and the followers of the Besht. For example, if the son of a Hasid married the daughter of a Mitnagid, both fathers would say Kaddish after their children, considering them to be dead and buried. So great was the bitterness. The Hasidim had great leaders. Tzaddikim they were called, righteous ones. Each Hasidic community had its own tzaddik, and his people would go to him with all their problems, and he would give them advice. They followed these leaders blindly. The Hasidim believed that the tzaddik was a superhuman link between themselves and God. Every act of his and every word he spoke was holy. Even the food he touched became holy. For example, they would grab the food scraps he left on his plate and eat them, because the food had become holy through his touch, and they wanted some of this holiness inside themselves. For a while, the tzaddikim were kind and gentle souls, like the Besht himself. But in the next century, the movement began to degenerate. Many of the positions of tzaddik became inherited posts, going automatically from father to son, even if the son was not a great leader. Many tzaddikim lived like Oriental monarchs. Some of them were out-and-out frauds, and they exploited their people terribly. Others were very sincere, and a few were even great scholars of the Talmud. In some Hasidic sects, the study of the Talmud became as important as it had been before the time of the Besht. Secular literature was forbidden, and the Hasidim lived shut off from the rest of the world. Anything that was not Jewish and Hasidic was forbidden. Their lives became frozen. The clothes they wear today, for example, are the same Polish-style clothes they wore hundreds of years ago. Their customs and beliefs are also the same as they were hundreds of years ago. But not all of the Hasidic communities are identical, Reuven. The Hasidim of Russia, Germany, Poland, and Hungary are different from one another. Not very different, but they are different. There are even Hasidic groups that believe their leaders should take upon themselves the sufferings of the Jewish people. You're surprised? But it is true. They believe that their sufferings would be unendurable if their leaders did not somehow absorb these sufferings into themselves. Strange belief, but a very important one as far as they are concerned. Reuven, Reb Saunders is a great Talmudist and a great tzaddik. He has a reputation for brilliance and compassion. It is said that he believes the soul is as important as the mind, if not more so. He inherited his position from his father. When he dies, the position will go automatically to Danny. My father stopped, looked at me with a smile, and said, "You are not asleep yet, Reuven?" "No, Abba. You are a very patient student. I think I'm going to have another glass of tea. My throat's a little dry." I took his glass, poured into it some strong brewed tea from the teapot, filled it with water from the kettle, then brought it back to him. He put a cube of sugar between his teeth and sipped slowly from the glass, letting the tea soak through the sugar. Then he put his glass down. "Tea is a blessing," he said, smiling, "especially to a schoolteacher who must always give long answers to short questions." I smiled back at him and waited patiently. "All right," my father said. "I see you want me to continue. Now, I'm going to tell you another story, also a true story, about a Jewish boy who lived in Poland in the second half of the 18th century. As I tell you the story, think of Reb Saunders' son, and you will have your answer. This boy, Reuven, was brilliant, literally a genius. His name was Solomon, and later in life he changed his long Polish name to Maimon. When he was young, he found that the Talmud could not satisfy his hunger for knowledge. His mind would not let him rest. He wanted to know what was happening in the outside world. German was by then a great scientific and cultural language, and he decided to teach himself to read German. But even after he learned German, he was not satisfied, because the reading of secular books was forbidden. Finally, at the age of 25, he abandoned his wife and child, and after many hardships, came to Berlin, where he joined a group of philosophers, read Aristotle, Maimonides, Spinoza, Leibniz, Hume, and Kant, and began to write philosophical books. It is astonishing how he was able to gobble up complicated philosophical treatises with such ease. He had a great mind, but it never left him in peace. He wandered from city to city, never finding roots anywhere, never satisfied, and finally died at 47 on the estate of a kind-hearted Christian who had befriended him. Reuven, Reb Saunders' son has a mind like Solomon Maimon's, perhaps even a greater mind. And Reb Saunders' son does not live in Poland. American is free. There are no walls here to hold back the Jews. Is it so strange, then, that he is breaking his father's rules and reading forbidden books? He cannot help himself. It is unbelievable what he has read these past few months. You are a brilliant student. I tell you that now very proudly. But he is a phenomenon. Once in a generation is a mind like that born. Now, Reuven, listen very carefully to what I'm going to tell you. Reb Saunders' son is a terribly torn and lonely boy. There is literally no one in the world he can talk to. He needs a friend. The accident with the baseball has bound him to you, and he has already sensed in you someone he can talk to without fear. I'm very proud of you for that. He would never have told you about his library visits if he believed for a moment you would not keep his words a secret trust. And I want you to let him be your friend, and to let yourself be his friend. I am certain you and Reb Saunders' son can help each other in such a friendship. I know you, and I know him, and I know what I am saying. And now, Reuven, the lecture is over. I'm going to finish my tea, and we will go to bed. What a lecture it has been. Do you want some tea? No, Abba. We sat in silence while my father sipped from his glass. You're very quiet, he said finally. It all started with a silly baseball game, I said. I can't believe it. Reuven, as you grow older, you will discover that the most important things that will happen to you will often come as a result of silly things, as you call them. Ordinary things is a better expression. That is the way the world is. I shook my head. I just can't believe it, I said again. This whole week has been like something from another world. The hospital, the people I met there, Mr. Savo, little Mickey, Billy, all because of a ball game. My father sipped his tea and looked at me over the rim of the glass. He said nothing, but he was watching me intently. I don't understand it, I said. Weeks and weeks go by. One Shabbat follows another, and I'm the same. Nothing has changed. And suddenly one day, something happens, and everything looks different. Different? What do you mean different? I told him how I had felt that afternoon when I came home from the hospital. He listened quietly, all the while sipping his tea. When I finished, I saw him smile. He put down the glass, sighed, and said, Reuven, it is a tragedy. Your mother is not alive to... He stopped, his voice breaking. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the clock on the shelf over the refrigerator. It is very late, he said. We will talk some more tomorrow. Yes, Abba. Reuven? Yes? Never mind, go to sleep. I'm going to sit here for a while and have another glass of tea. I left him sitting at the kitchen table, staring down at the white cloth. Chapter 7. The next day, I met Danny's father. My father and I woke early so as to be in our synagogue by 8:30. Manya came in a little before 8 and served us a light breakfast. Then my father and I started out on the 3-block walk to the synagogue. It was a beautiful day, and I felt happy to be out on the street again. It was wonderful to be outside that hospital, looking at the people and watching the traffic. When it didn't rain and wasn't too cold, my father and I always enjoyed our Shabbat walks to and from the synagogue. There were many synagogues in Williamsburg. Each Hasidic sect had its own house of worship. Shtiblach, they were called. Most of them badly lighted, musty rooms, with benches or chairs crowded together, and with windows that seemed always to be closed. There were also those synagogues in which Jews who were not Hasidim worshipped. The synagogue where my father and I prayed had once been a large grocery store. It stood on Lee Avenue, and though the bottom half of its window was curtained off, the sun shone in through the uncurtained portion of the glass, and I loved to sit there on a Shabbat morning with the gold of the sun on the leaves of my prayer book and pray. The synagogue was attended mostly by men like my father, teachers from my yeshiva, and others who had come under the influence of the Jewish Enlightenment in Europe, and whose distaste for Hasidism was intense and outspoken. Many of the students in the yeshiva I attended prayed there too, and it was good to be able to be with them on a Shabbat morning. When my father and I came into the synagogue that morning, the service had just begun. We took our usual seats a few rows up from the window and joined in the prayers. I saw Davy Cantor come in. He nodded to me, looking gloomy behind his glasses, and took his seat. The prayers went slowly. The man at the podium had a fine voice, and waited until each portion of the service had been completed by everyone before he began to chant. I glanced at my father during the silent devotion. He stood in his long prayer shawl, its silver trim bathed in sunlight, its fringes dangling almost to the floor. His eyes were closed. He always prayed from memory, except during a festival or a high holy service, and he was swaying slightly back and forth, his lips murmuring the words. I did not wear a prayer shawl. They were worn only by adults who were or had once been married. During the Torah service, which followed the silent devotion, I was one of the 8 men called up to the podium to recite the blessing over the Torah. Standing at the podium, I listened carefully to the reader as he chanted the words from the scroll. When he was done, I recited the second blessing and the prayer that thanks God when a serious accident has been avoided. As I left the podium and walked back to my seat, I wondered what blessing, if any, I would have recited had my eye been blinded. What blessing would Mr. Savo make if he were a Jew, I asked myself. For the rest of the service, I thought constantly of Mr. Savo and Billy. Lunch was ready for us when we got home, and Manya kept adding food to my plate and urging me to eat. Food was necessary for someone who had just come back from the hospital, she told me in her broken English. My father talked about my work at school. I must be careful not to read until Dr. Sneidman gave me his permission, he said. But there was nothing wrong if I attended classes and listened. Perhaps he could help me study. Perhaps he could read to me. We would try it and see. After the grace, my father lay down on his bed to rest for a while, and I sat on the porch and stared at the sunlight on the flowers and the ailanthus. I sat like that for about an hour, and then my father came out to tell me that he was going over to see one of his colleagues. I lay back on the lounge chair and stared up at the sky. It was a deep blue with no clouds, and I felt I could almost touch it. It was the color of Danny's eyes, I thought. It's as blue as Danny's eyes. What color are Billy's eyes, I asked myself. I think they're also blue. Both Danny's and Billy's eyes are blue, but one set of eyes is blind. Maybe they're not blind anymore, I thought. Maybe both sets of eyes are okay now. I fell asleep, thinking about Danny's and Billy's eyes. It was a light, dreamless sleep, the kind of half-sleep that refreshes but does not shut off the world completely. I felt the warm wind and smelled newly cut grass, and a bird perched on a branch of the ailanthus and sang for a long time before it flew away. Somehow I knew where that bird was, though I did not open my eyes. There were children playing on the street, and once a dog barked and a car's brakes screeched. Someone was playing a piano nearby, and the music drifted slowly in and out of my mind like the ebb and flow of ocean surf. I almost recognized the melody, but I could not be sure. It slipped like a cool and silken wind from my grasp. I heard a door open and close, and there were footsteps against the wood, and then silence, and I knew someone had come onto the porch, but I would not open my eyes. I did not want to lose that twilight sleep, with its odors and sounds and whispered flow of music. Someone was on the porch looking at me. I felt him looking at me. I felt him slowly push away the sleep, and finally I opened my eyes, and there was Danny, standing at the foot of the lounge chair, with his arms folded across his chest, clicking his tongue and shaking his head. "You sleep like a baby," he said. "I feel guilty waking you." I yawned, stretched, and sat up on the edge of the lounge chair. "That was delicious," I added, yawning again. "What time is it?" "It's after 5, sleepyhead. I've been waiting here 10 minutes for you to wake up." "I slept almost 3 hours," I said. "It was some sleep." He clicked his tongue again and shook his head. "What kind of infield is that?" He was imitating Mr. Gallanter. "How can we keep that infield solid if you're asleep there, Malter?" I laughed and got to my feet. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. "I don't care. I thought we'd go over to my father's shul. He wants to meet you." "Where is it?" I asked him. "It's 5 blocks from here." "Is my father inside?" "I didn't see him. Your maid let me in. Don't you want to go?" "Sure," I said. "Let me wash up and put on a tie and jacket. I don't have a caftan, you know." He grinned at me. "The uniform is a requirement for members of the fold only," he said. "Okay, member of the fold. Come on inside with me." I washed, dressed, told Manya that when my father came in she should let him know where I had gone, and we went out. "What does your father want to see me about?" I asked Danny as we went down the stone stairway of the house. "He wants to meet you. I told him we were friends." We turned up the street, heading toward Lee Avenue. He always has to approve of my friends, Danny said, especially if they're outside the fold. Do you mind my telling him that we're friends? No, because I really think we are, Danny said. I didn't say anything. We walked to the corner, then turned right on Lee Avenue. The street was busy with traffic and crowded with people. I wondered what any of my classmates would think if they saw me walking with Danny. It would become quite a topic of conversation in the neighborhood. Well, they would see me with him sooner or later. Danny was looking at me, his sculptured face wearing a serious expression. Don't you have any brothers or sisters? He asked. No, my mother died soon after I was born. I'm sorry to hear that. How about you? I have a brother and a sister. My sister's 14 and my brother is 8. I'm going on 16. So am I said. We discovered that we had been born in the same year, 2 days apart. You've been living 5 blocks away from me all these years, and I never knew who you were, I said. We stick pretty close together. My father doesn't like us to mix with outsiders. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your father sounds like a tyrant. Danny didn't disagree. He's a very strong-willed person. When he makes his mind up about something, that's it. Finished. Doesn't he object to your going around with an epikoros like me? That's why he wants to meet you. I thought you said your father never talks to you. He doesn't, except when we study Talmud. But he did this time. I got up enough courage to tell him about you, and he said to bring you over today. That's the longest sentence he said to me in years, except for the time I had to convince him to let us have a ball team. I'd hate to have my father not talk to me. It isn't pleasant, Danny said very quietly. But he's a great man. You'll see when you meet him. Is your brother going to be a rabbi too? Danny gave me a queer look. Why do you ask that? No special reason. Is he? I don't know. Probably he will. His voice had a strange, almost wistful quality to it. I decided not to press the point. He went back to talking about his father. He's really a great man, my father. He saved his community. He brought them all over to America after the First World War. I never heard about that, I told him. That's right, he said, and told me about his father's early years in Russia. I listened in growing astonishment. Danny's grandfather had been a well-known Hasidic rabbi in a small town in southern Russia, and his father had been the second of 2 sons. The firstborn son had been in line to inherit his father's rabbinic position, but during a period of study in Odessa, he suddenly vanished. Some said he had been murdered by Cossacks. For a time, there was even a rumor that he had been converted to Christianity and had gone to live in France. The second son was ordained at the age of 17, and by the time he was 20, had achieved an awesome reputation as a Talmudist. When his father died, he automatically inherited the position of rabbinic leadership. He was 21 years old at the time. He remained the rabbi of his community throughout the years of Russia's participation in the First World War. 1 week before the Bolshevist Revolution, in the autumn of 1917, his young wife bore him a second child, a son. 2 months later, his wife, his son, and his 18-month-old daughter were shot to death by a band of marauding Cossacks, one of the many bandit gangs that roamed through Russia during the period of chaos that followed the revolution. He himself was left for dead, with a pistol bullet in his chest and a saber wound in his pelvis. He lay unconscious for half a day near the bodies of his wife and children, and then the Russian peasant who tended the stove in the synagogue and swept its floor found him and carried him to his hut, where he extracted the bullet, bathed the wounds, and tied him to the bed so he would not fall out during the days and nights he shivered and screamed, with the fever and delirium that followed. The synagogue had been burned to the ground. Its ark was a gutted mass of charred wood. Its 4 Torah scrolls were seared black. Its holy books were piles of gray ash blown about by the wind. Of the 118 Jewish families in the community, only 43 survived. When it was discovered that the rabbi was not dead, but was being cared for by the Russian peasant, he was brought into the still intact home of a Jewish family and nursed back to health. He spent the winter recovering from his wounds. During that winter, the Bolshevists signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, and Russia withdrew from the war. The chaos inside the country intensified, and the village was raided 4 times by Cossacks. But each of these times, the Jews were warned by friendly peasants and were concealed in the woods or in huts. In the spring, the rabbi announced to his people that they were done with Russia. Russia was Esav and Edom, the land of Satan and the angel of death. They would travel together to America and rebuild their community. 8 days later, they left. They bribed and bargained their way through Russia, Austria, France, Belgium, and England. 5 months later, they arrived in New York City. At Ellis Island, the rabbi was asked his name, and he gave it as Senders. On the official forms, Senders became Saunders. After the customary period of quarantine, they were permitted to leave the island, and Jewish welfare workers helped them settle in the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. 3 years later, the rabbi married once again, and in 1929, 2 days before the stock market crash, Danny was born in the Brooklyn Memorial Hospital. 18 months later, his sister was born, and 5.5 years after the birth of his sister, his brother was born by cesarean section, both in that same hospital. They all followed him? I asked. Just like that? Of course. They would have followed him anywhere. I don't understand that. I didn't know a rabbi had that kind of power. He's more than a rabbi, Danny said. He's a tzaddik. My father told me about Hasidism last night. He said it was a fine idea until some of the tzaddikim began to take advantage of their followers. He wasn't very complimentary. It depends upon your point of view, Danny said quietly. I can't understand how Jews can follow another human being so blindly. He's not just another human being. Is he like God? Something like that. He's a kind of messenger of God, a bridge between his followers and God. I don't understand it. It almost sounds like Catholicism. That's the way it is, Danny said, whether you understand it or not. I'm not offending you or anything. I just want to be honest. I want you to be honest, Danny said. We walked on in silence. A block beyond the synagogue, where my father and I prayed, we made a right turn into a narrow street, crowded with brownstones and sycamores. It was a duplicate of the street on which I lived, but a good deal older and less neatly kept. Many of the houses were unkempt, and there were very few hydrangea bushes or morning glories on the front lawns. The sycamores formed a solid tangled bower that kept out the sunlight. The stone banisters on the outside stairways were chipped, their surfaces blotched with dirt, and the edges of the stone steps were round and smooth from years of use. Cats scrambled through the garbage cans that stood in front of some of the houses, and the sidewalks were strewn with old newspapers, ice cream and candy wrappers, worn cardboard cartons, and torn paper bags. Women in long-sleeved dresses, with kerchiefs covering their heads, many with infants in their arms, others heavily pregnant, sat on the stone steps of the stairways, talking loudly in Yiddish. The street throbbed with the noise of playing children, who seemed in constant motion, dodging around cars, racing up and down steps, chasing after cats, climbing trees, balancing themselves as they tried walking on top of the banisters, pursuing one another in furious games of tag, all with their fringes and earlocks dancing wildly in the air and trailing out behind them. We were walking quickly now under the dark ceiling of sycamores, and a tall, heavily built man in a black beard and black caftan came alongside me, bumped me roughly to avoid running into a woman, and passed me without a word. The liquid streams of racing children, the noisy chatter of long-sleeved women, the worn buildings and blotched banisters, the garbage cans and the scrambling cats, all gave me the feeling of having slid silently across a strange threshold, and for a long moment I regretted having let Danny take me into his world. We were approaching a group of about 30 black caftanned men who were standing in front of the 3-story brownstone at the end of the street. They formed a solid wall, and I did not want to push through them, so I slowed my steps. But Danny took my arm with one hand and tapped his other hand upon the shoulder of a man on the outer rim of the crowd. The man turned, pivoting the upper portion of his body, a middle-aged man, his dark beard streaked with gray, his thick brows edging into a frown of annoyance, and I saw his eyes go wide. He bowed slightly and pushed back, and a whisper went through the crowd like a wind, and it parted, and Danny and I walked through, Danny holding me by the arm and nodding his head at the greetings in Yiddish that came in quiet murmurs from the people he passed. It was as if a black-waved frozen sea had been sliced by a scythe, forming black solid walls along a gelled path. I saw black and gray-bearded heads bow toward Danny, and dark brows arched sharply over eyes that stared questions at me, and at the way Danny was holding me by the arm. We were almost halfway through the crowd now, walking slowly together, Danny's fingers on the part of my arm just over the elbow. I felt myself naked and fragile, an intruder, and my eyes, searching for anything but the bearded faces to look at, settled finally upon the sidewalk at my feet. Then, because I wanted something other than the murmured greetings in Yiddish to listen to, I began to hear distinctly the tapping sounds of Danny's metal-capped shoes against the cement pavement. It seemed a sharp, unnaturally loud sound, and my ears fixed on it. and I could hear it clearly as we went along. I listened to it intently, the soft scrape of the shoe and the sharp tap-tap of the metal caps, as we went up the stone steps of the stairway that led into the brownstone in front of which the crowd stood. The caps tapped against the stone of the steps, then against the stone of the top landing in front of the double door, and I remembered the old man I often saw walking along Lee Avenue, moving carefully through the busy street and tapping his metal-capped cane, which served him for the eyes he had lost in a First World War trench during a German gas attack. The hallway of the brownstone was crowded with black caftaned men, and there was suddenly a path there, too, and more murmured greetings and questioning eyes. And then Danny and I went through a door that stood open to our right, and we were in the synagogue. It was a large room, and looked to be the exact size of the apartment in which my father and I lived. What was my father's bedroom was here the section of the synagogue that contained the ark, the eternal light, an 8-branched candelabrum, a small podium to the right of the ark, and a large podium about 10 feet in front of the ark. The 2 podiums and the ark were covered with red velvet. What was our kitchen, hallway, bathroom, my bedroom, my father's study, and our front room was here the portion of the synagogue where the worshippers sat. Each seat consisted of a chair set before a stand with a sloping top, the bottom edge of which was braced with a jutting strip of wood to prevent what was on the stand from sliding to the floor. The seats extended back to about 20 feet from the rear wall of the synagogue, the wall opposite the ark. A small portion of the synagogue near the upper door of the hallway had been curtained off with white cheesecloth. This was the women's section. It contained a few rows of wooden chairs. The remaining section of the synagogue, the section without chairs, was crowded with long tables and benches. Through the middle of the synagogue ran a narrow aisle that ended at the large podium. The walls were painted white. The wooden floor was a dark brown. There were 3 rear windows curtained in black velvet. The ceiling was white, and naked bulbs hung from it on dark wires, flooding the room with harsh light. We stood for a moment just inside the door, near one of the tables. Men passed constantly in and out of the room. Some remained in the hallway to chat. Others took seats. Some of the seats were occupied by men studying Talmud, reading from the Book of Psalms, or talking among themselves in Yiddish. The benches at the tables stood empty, and on the white cloths that covered the tables were paper cups, wooden forks and spoons, and paper plates filled with pickled herring and onion, lettuce, tomatoes, gefilte fish, Shabbat loaves, the braided bread called challah, tuna fish, salmon, and hard-boiled eggs. At the edge of the table near the window was a brown leather chair. On the table in front of the chair was a pitcher, a towel, a saucer, and a large plate covered with a Shabbat cloth, a white satin cloth, with the Hebrew word for the Shabbat embroidered upon it in gold. A long serrated silver knife lay alongside the plate. A tall, heavy-set boy came in the door, nodded at Danny, then noticed me, and stared. I recognized him immediately as Dov Shlomovitz, the player on Danny's team who had run into me at second base and knocked me down. He seemed about to say something to Danny, then changed his mind, turned stiffly, went up the narrow aisle, and found a seat. Sitting in the seat, he glanced at us once over the shoulder, then opened a book on his stand and began to sway back and forth. I looked at Danny and managed what must have been a sick smile. "I feel like a cowboy surrounded by Indians," I told him in a whisper. Danny grinned at me reassuringly and let go of my arm. "You're in the holy halls," he said. "It takes getting used to." "That was like the parting of the Red Sea out there," I said. "How did you do it?" "I'm my father's son, remember? I'm the inheritor of the dynasty. Number 1 in our catechism, treat the son as you would the father, because one day the son will be the father." "You sound like a mitnaged," I told him, managing another weak smile. "No, I don't," he said. "I sound like someone who reads too much. Come on, we'll sit up front. My father will be down soon." "You live in this house?" "We have the upper 2 floors. It's a fine arrangement. Come on, they're beginning to come in." The crowd in the hallway and in the front of the building had begun coming through the door. Danny and I went up the aisle. He led me to the front row of seats that stood at the right of the large podium and just behind the small podium. Danny sat down in the second seat, and I sat in the third. I assumed that the first seat was for his father. The crowd came in quickly, and the synagogue was soon filled with the sounds of shuffling shoes, scraping chairs, and loud voices talking Yiddish. I heard no English, only Yiddish. Sitting in the chair, I glanced over at Dov Shlomovitz and found him staring at me, his heavy face wearing an expression of surprise and hostility. And I suddenly realized that Danny was probably going to have as much trouble with his friends over our friendship as I would have with mine. Maybe less, I thought. I'm not the son of a tzaddik. No one steps aside for me in a crowd. Dov Shlomovitz looked away, but I saw others in the crowded synagogue staring at me too, and I looked down at the worn prayer book on my stand, feeling exposed and naked again, and very alone. 2 gray-bearded old men came over to Danny, and he got respectfully to his feet. They had had an argument over a passage of Talmud, they told him, each of them interpreting it in a different way, and they wondered who had been correct. They mentioned the passage, and Danny nodded, immediately identified the tractate and the page, then coldly and mechanically repeated the passage word for word, giving his interpretation of it, and quoting at the same time the interpretations of a number of medieval commentators, like the Meiri, the Rashba, and the Maharsha. The passage was a difficult one, he said, gesticulating with his hands as he spoke, the thumb of his right hand describing wide circles as he emphasized certain key points of interpretation, and both men had been correct. One had unknowingly adopted the interpretation of the Meiri, the other of the Rashba. The men smiled and went away satisfied. Danny sat down. "That's a tough passage," he said. "I can't make head or tail out of it. Your father would probably say the text was all wrong." He was talking quietly and grinning broadly. "I read some of your father's articles, sneaked them off my father's desk. The one on that passage in Kedushin about the business with the king is very good. It's full of real apikorsishy stuff." I nodded and tried another smile. My father had read that article to me before he had sent it off to his publisher. He had begun reading his articles to me during the past year, and spent a lot of time explaining them. The noise in the synagogue had become very loud, almost a din, and the room seemed to throb and swell with the scraping chairs and the talking men. Some children were running up and down the aisle, laughing and shouting, and a number of younger men lounged near the door, talking loudly and gesticulating with their hands. I had the feeling for a moment I was in the carnival I had seen recently in a movie, with its pushing, shoving, noisy throng, and its shouting, arm-waving vendors and pitchmen. I sat quietly, staring down at the prayer book on my stand. I opened the book and turned to the afternoon service. Its pages were yellow and old, with ragged edges and worn corners. I sat there staring at the first psalm of the service and thinking of the almost new prayer book I had held in my hands that morning. I felt Danny nudge me with his elbow, and I looked up. "My father's coming," he said. His voice was quiet, and I thought a little strained. The noise inside the synagogue ceased so abruptly that I felt its absence as one would a sudden lack of air. It stopped in swift waves, beginning at the rear of the synagogue and ending at the chairs near the podium. I heard no signal and no call for silence. It simply stopped, cut off, as if a door had slammed shut on a playroom filled with children. The silence that followed had a strange quality to it: expectation, eagerness, love, awe. A man was coming slowly up the narrow aisle, followed by a child. He was a tall man, and he wore a black satin kaftan and a fur-trimmed black hat. As he passed each row of seats, men rose, bowed slightly, and sat again. Some leaned over to touch him. He nodded his head at the murmur of greetings directed to him from the seats, and his long black beard moved back and forth against his chest, and his earlocks swayed. He walked slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, and as he came closer to me, I could see that the part of his face not hidden by the beard looked cut from stone, the nose sharp and pointed, the cheekbones ridged, the lips full, the brow like marble etched with lines, the sockets deep, the eyebrows thick with black hair, and separated by a single wedge, like a furrow plowed into a naked field. The eyes dark, with pinpoints of white light playing in them, as they do in black stones in the sun. Danny's face mirrored his exactly, except for the hair and the color of the eyes. The child who followed him, holding onto the kaftan with his right hand, was a delicate miniature of the man, with the same kaftan, the same fur-trimmed hat, the same face, the same color hair, though beardless, and I realized he was Danny's brother. I glanced at Danny and saw him staring down at his stand, his face without expression. I saw the eyes of the congregants follow the man as he came slowly up the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back, his head nodding, and then I saw them on Danny and me as he came up to us. Danny rose quickly to his feet, and I followed, and we stood there, waiting, as the man's dark eyes moved across my face. I could feel them moving across my face like a hand, and fixed upon my left eye. I had a sudden vision of my father's gentle eyes behind their steel-rimmed spectacles, but it vanished swiftly, because Danny was introducing me to Reb Saunders. "This is Reuven Malter," he said quietly in Yiddish. Reb Saunders continued to stare at my left eye. I felt naked under his gaze, and he must have sensed my discomfort, because quite suddenly he offered me his hand. I raised my hand to take it, then realized, as my hand was going up, that he was not offering me his hand but his fingers, and I held them for a moment. They were dry and limp, then let my hand drop. "You're the son of David Malter?" Reb Saunders asked me in Yiddish. His voice was deep and nasal, like Danny's, and the words came out almost in accusation. I nodded my head. I had a moment of panic, trying to decide whether to answer him in Yiddish or English. I wondered if he knew English. My Yiddish was very poor. I decided to answer in English. "Your eye," Reb Saunders said in Yiddish. "It is healed?" "It's fine," I said in English. My voice came out a little hoarse, and I swallowed. I glanced at the congregants. They were staring at us intently, in complete silence. Reb Saunders looked at me for a moment, and I saw the dark eyes blink, the lids going up and down like shades. When he spoke again, it was still in Yiddish. "The doctor, the professor who operated, he said your eye is healed? He wants to see me again in a few days, but he said the eye is fine." I saw his head nod slightly, and the beard go up and down against his chest. The lights from the naked bulb on the ceiling gleamed off his satin caftan. "Tell me, you know mathematics? My son tells me you are very good in mathematics." I nodded. "So, we will see. And you know Hebrew? A son of David Malter surely knows Hebrew." I nodded again. "We will see," Reb Saunders said. I glanced out of the sides of my eyes and saw Danny looking at the floor, his face expressionless. The child stood a little behind Reb Saunders and stared up at us, his mouth open. "No," Reb Saunders said. "Later we will talk more. I want to know my son's friend, especially the son of David Malter." Then he went past us and stood in front of the little podium, his back to the congregation, the little boy still holding on to his caftan. Danny and I sat down. A whisper moved through the congregation, followed by the rustle of pages as prayer books were opened. An old gray-bearded man went up to the large podium, put on a prayer shawl, and started the service. The old man had a weak voice, and I could barely hear him over the prayers of the worshippers. Reb Saunders stood with his back to the congregation, swaying back and forth, occasionally clapping his hands together, and the child stood at his right, swaying too, in obvious imitation of his father. Throughout the entire service, Reb Saunders stood with his back to the congregation, sometimes raising his head toward the ceiling, or raising his hands to cover his eyes. He turned only when the Torah was taken from the ark and read. The service ended with the Kaddish, and then Reb Saunders walked slowly back up the aisle, followed by the child, who was still clinging to his father's caftan. As the child passed me, I noticed his dark eyes were very large, and his face was deathly pale. Danny nudged me with his elbow and motioned with his head toward the rear of the synagogue. He rose, and the two of us followed Reb Saunders up the aisle. I could see the eyes of the congregants on my face, and then feel them on my back. I saw Reb Saunders go to the leather chair at the table near the end window and sit down. The child sat on the bench to his left. Danny led me to the table and sat on the bench to his father's right. He motioned me to sit down next to him, and I did. The congregants rose and came toward the rear of the synagogue. The silence was gone now, burst as abruptly as it had begun, and someone started chanting a tune. The others took it up, clapping their hands in rhythm to the melody. The silence was gone now, burst as abruptly as it had begun, and someone started chanting a tune. The others took it up, clapping their hands in rhythm to the melody. They were filing out the door, probably to wash their hands, I thought, and soon they were coming back in and finding seats at the tables, the benches scraping loudly as they were moved back and forth. The singing had stopped. Our table filled rapidly, mostly with older men. Reb Saunders stood up, poured water over his hands from the pitcher, the water spilling into the saucer, then wiped his hands, removed the white satin cloth that covered the challah, said the blessing over bread, cut a section off the end of the challah, swallowed it, and sat down. Danny got to his feet, washed his hands, cut 2 slices from the challah, handed me one, took one for himself, made the blessing, ate, and sat. He passed the pitcher to me, and I repeated the ritual, but I remained seated. Then Danny cut the remainder of the challah into small pieces, gave a piece to his brother, and handed the plate to the old man sitting next to me. The pieces of challah disappeared swiftly, grabbed up by the men at the table. Reb Saunders put some salad and fish on his plate, and ate a small piece of the fish, holding it in his fingers. A man from one of the other tables came over and took the plate. Danny filled another plate for his father. Reb Saunders ate slowly and in silence. I was not very hungry, but I made some attempt at eating so as not to insult anyone. Frequently during the meal, I felt rather than saw Reb Saunders' eyes on my face. Danny was quiet. His little brother pecked at the food on his plate, eating little. The skin of his face and hands was almost as white as the tablecloth, drawn tightly over the bones, and the veins showed like blue branches on his face and on the tops of his hands. He sat quietly, and once he began to pick his nose, saw his father look at him, and stopped, his lower lip trembling a little. He bent over his plate and poked at a slice of tomato with a thin, stubby finger. Danny and I said nothing to each other throughout that entire meal. Once I looked up and saw his father staring at me, his eyes black beneath the thick brows. I looked away, feeling as though my skin had been peeled away and my insides photographed. Someone began to sing the Atah Echad, one of the prayers from the afternoon service. The meal was over, and the men began to sway slowly, in unison with the melody. The singing filled the synagogue, and Reb Saunders sat back in his leather seat and sang too. And then Danny was singing. I knew the melody, and I joined in, hesitantly at first, then strongly, swaying back and forth. At the end of the song, another melody was begun, a light, fast, wordless tune, sung to the syllables chirry-bim, chirry-bam, and the swaying was a little faster now, and hands were clapped in time to the rhythm. Then tune followed tune, and I felt myself begin to relax as I continued to join the singing. I found that most of the melodies were familiar to me, especially the slow, somber ones that were meant to convey the sadness of the singers over the conclusion of the Shabbat, and the tunes I did not know I was able to follow easily, because the basic melody lines were almost all the same. After a while I was singing loudly, swaying back and forth, and clapping my hands, and once I saw Reb Saunders looking at me, and his lips curved into a shadow of a smile. I smiled at Danny, and he smiled back at me, and we sat there for about half an hour, singing, swaying, and clapping, and I felt light and happy and completely at ease. So far as I could see, Reb Saunders' little son was the only one in the synagogue not singing. He sat pecking at his food and poking at the slice of tomato on his paper plate with his thin, veined hand. The singing went on, and then it stopped. I glanced around to see what had happened, but everyone was sitting very still, looking over at our table. Reb Saunders washed his hands again, and others spilled what was left of the water in their paper cups over their hands. The introductory psalm to the grace was sung together, and then Reb Saunders began the grace. He chanted with his eyes closed, swaying slightly in his leather chair. After the opening lines of the grace, each man prayed quietly, and I saw Danny lean forward, put his elbows on the table, cover his eyes with his right hand, his lips whispering the words. Then the grace was done, and there was silence, a long, solid silence, in which no one moved and everyone waited, and I stared at Reb Saunders, who was sitting in his chair with his eyes closed, swaying slightly back and forth. I saw Danny take his elbows from the table and sit up straight. He stared down at his paper plate, his face expressionless, and I almost had the feeling that he had gone rigid, tense as a soldier does before he jumps from shelter into open combat. Everyone waited, and no one moved. No one coughed. No one even took a deep breath. The silence became unreal, and seemed suddenly filled with a noise of its own, the noise of a too long silence. Even the child was staring now at his father, his eyes like black stones against the naked whiteness of his veined face. And then Reb Saunders began to speak. He swayed back and forth in the leather chair, his eyes closed, his left hand in the crook of his right elbow, the fingers of his right hand stroking his black beard. And I could see everyone at the tables lean forward, eyes staring, mouths slightly open, some of the older men cupping their hands behind their ears to catch his words. He began in a low voice, the words coming out slowly in a sing-song kind of chant. "The great and holy Rabban Gamaliel," he said, "taught us the following. Do his will as if it were thy will, that he may do thy will as if it were his will. Nullify thy will before his will, that he may nullify the will of others before thy will." What does this mean? It means that if we do as the Master of the universe wishes, then he will do as we wish. A question immediately presents itself. What does it mean to say that the Master of the universe will do what we wish? He is, after all, the Master of the universe, the Creator of heaven and earth, the King of kings. And what are we? Do we not say every day, "Are not all the mighty as naught before thee, the men of renown as though they had not been"? the wise as if without knowledge, and the men of understanding as if without discernment? What are we that the Master of the universe should do our will?" Reb Saunders paused, and I saw two of the old men who were sitting at our table look at each other and nod. He swayed back and forth in his leather chair, his fingers stroking his beard, and continued to speak in a quiet, sing-song voice. "All men come into the world in the same way. We are born in pain, for it is written, 'In pain shall ye bring forth children.' We are born naked and without strength. Like dust we are born. Like dust can the child be blown about. Like dust is his life, like dust is his strength. And like dust do many remain all their lives, until they are put away in dust, in a place of worms and maggots. Will the Master of the universe obey the will of a man whose life is dust? What is the great and holy Rabban Gamaliel teaching us?" His voice was beginning to rise now. "What is he telling us? What does it mean to say the Master of the universe will do our will? The will of men who remain dust? Impossible. The will of what men, then? We must say, the will of men who do not remain dust. But how can we raise ourselves above dust? Listen to me, for this is a mighty thing the rabbis teach us." He paused again, and I saw Danny glance at him, then stare down again at his paper plate. "Rabbi Halafta, son of Dosa, teaches us, when 10 people sit together and occupy themselves with the Torah, the presence of God abides among them. As it is said, God standeth in the congregation of the godly. And whence can it be shown that the same applies to 5? Because it is said, He had founded his band upon the earth. And whence can it be shown that the same applies to 3? Because it is said, He judgeth among the judges. And whence can it be shown that the same applies to 2? Because it is said, Then they that feared the Lord spake one with the other, and the Lord gave heed and heard. And whence can it be shown that the same applies even to 1? Because it is said, In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come into thee, and I will bless thee. Listen to this great teaching. A congregation is 10. It is nothing new that the Holy Presence resides among 10. A band is 5. It is also nothing new that the Holy Presence resides among 5. Judges are 3. If the Holy Presence did not reside among judges, there would be no justice in the world. So this too is not new. That the Presence can reside even among 2 is also not impossible to understand. But that the Presence can reside in 1, even in 1, that already is a mighty thing. Even in 1. If 1 man studies Torah, the Presence is with him. If 1 man studies Torah, the Master of the universe is already in the world. A mighty thing. And to bring the Master of the world into the world is also to raise oneself up from the dust. Torah raises us from the dust. Torah gives us strength. Torah clothes us. Torah brings the presence. The sing-song chant had died away. He was talking in a straight, loud voice that rang through the terrible silence in the synagogue. But to study Torah is not such a simple thing. Torah is a task for all day and all night. It is a task filled with danger. Does not Rabbi Meir teach us, he who is walking by the way and studying, and breaks off his study and says, How fine is that tree, how fine is that field, him the Scripture regards as if he had forfeited his life. I saw Danny quickly glance at his father, then lower his eyes. His body sagged a little, a smile played on his lips, and I thought I even heard him sigh quietly. He had forfeited his life. His life. So great is the study of Torah. And now, listen to this word. Whose task is it to study Torah? Of whom does the Master of the universe demand, Ye shall meditate over it day and night? Of the world? No. What does the world know of Torah? The world is Esav. The world is Amalek. The world is Cossacks. The world is Hitler. May his name and memory be erased. Of whom, then? Of the people of Israel. We are commanded to study his Torah. We are commanded to sit in the light of the presence. It is for this we were created. Does not the great and holy Rabbi Yochanan, son of Zakkai, teach us, If thou hast learnt much Torah, ascribe not any merit to thyself, for thereunto wast thou created. Not the world, but the people of Israel. The people of Israel must study his Torah. His voice stormed the silence. I found myself holding my breath, my heart thumping in my ears. I could not take my eyes off his face, which was alive now, or his eyes, which were open and filled with dark fire. He struck the table with his hand, and I felt myself go cold with fright. Danny was watching him too now, and his little brother stared at him as though in a trance, his mouth open, his eyes glazed. The world kills us. The world flays our skin from our bodies and throws us to the flames. The world laughs at Torah, and if it does not kill us, it tempts us. It misleads us. It contaminates us. It asks us to join in its ugliness, its impurities, its abominations. The world is Amalek. It is not the world that is commanded to study Torah, but the people of Israel. Listen, listen to this mighty teaching. His voice was suddenly lower, quieter, intimate. It is written, this world is like a vestibule before the world to come. Prepare thyself in the vestibule, that thou mayest enter into the hall. The meaning is clear. The vestibule is this world, and the hall is the world to come. Listen. In Gematria, the words, this world, come out to 163, and the words, the world to come out 154. The difference between this world and the world to come comes out to 9. 9 is half of 18. 18 is Chai, life. In this world, there is only half of Chai. We are only half alive in this world. Only half alive. A whisper went through the crowd at the tables, and I could see heads nod and lips smile. They had been waiting for this, apparently, the Gematria, and they strained forward to listen. One of my teachers in school had told me about Gematria. Each letter of the Hebrew alphabet is also a number, so that every Hebrew word has a numerical value. The word for this world in Hebrew is Olam Hazeh, and by adding the numerical value of each letter, the total numerical value of the word becomes 163. I had heard others do this before, and I enjoyed listening because sometimes they were quite clever and ingenious. I was beginning to feel relaxed again, and I listened carefully. Hear me now. Listen. How can we make our lives full? How can we fill our lives so that we are 18, Chai, and not 9, not half Chai? Rabbi Joshua, son of Levi, teaches us, whoever does not labor in the Torah is said to be under the divine censure. He is Nozuf, a person whom the Master of the universe hates. A righteous man, a tzaddik, studies Torah, for it is written, for his delight is in the Torah of God, and over his Torah doth he meditate day and night. In Gematria, Nozuf comes out 143, and Tzaddik comes out 204. What is the difference between Nozuf and Tzaddik? 61. To whom does a Tzaddik dedicate his life? To the Master of the universe, Lael, to God. The word Lael in Gematria is 61. It is a life dedicated to God that makes the difference between the Nozuf and the Tzaddik. Another murmur of approval went through the crowd. Reb Saunders was very good at Gematria, I thought. I was really enjoying myself now. And now listen to me further. In Gematria, the letters of the word Traklin, hall, the hall that refers to the world to come out 399. And Prosdor, the vestibule that is this world, comes out 513. Take Traklin from Prosdor, and we have 114. Now listen to me. A righteous man, we said, is 204. A righteous man lives by Torah. Torah is mayim, water. The great and holy rabbis always compare Torah to water. The word mayim in Gematria is 90. Take mayim from tzaddik, and we also have 114. From this we learn that the righteous man who removes himself from Torah also removes himself from the world to come. The whisper of delight was loud this time, and men nodded their heads and smiled. Some of them were even poking each other with their elbows to indicate their pleasure. That one had really been clever. I started to go over it again in my mind. We see that without Torah, there is only half a life. We see that without Torah, we are dust. We see that without Torah, we are abominations. He was saying this quietly, almost as if it were a litany. His eyes were still open, and he was looking directly at Danny now. When we study Torah, then the Master of the universe listens. Then he hears our words. Then he fulfills our wishes. For the Master of the universe promises strength to those who preoccupy themselves in Torah. As it is written, so ye may be strong. And he promises length of days, as it is written, so your days may be lengthened. May Torah be a fountain of waters to all who drink from it, and may it bring to us the Messiah speedily and in our day. Amen. A chorus of loud and scattered amens followed. I sat in my seat and saw Reb Saunders looking at Danny, then at me. I felt completely at ease, and I somewhat brazenly smiled and nodded, as if to indicate that I had enjoyed his words, or at least the gematria part of his words. I didn't agree at all with his notions of the world as being contaminated. Albert Einstein is part of the world, I told myself. President Roosevelt is part of the world. The millions of soldiers fighting Hitler are part of the world. I thought that the meal was ended now, and we would start the evening service, and I almost began to get out of my seat, when I realized that another silence had settled upon the men at the tables. I sat still and looked around. They seemed all to be staring at Danny. He was sitting quietly, smiling a little, his fingers playing with the edge of his paper plate. Reb Saunders sat back in his leather chair and folded his arms across his chest. The little boy was poking at the tomato again and glancing at Danny from the tops of his dark eyes. He twirled a side curl around one of his fingers, and I saw his tongue dart out of his mouth, run over his lips, then dart back in. I wondered what was going on. Reb Saunders sighed loudly and nodded at Danny. "Nu, Daniel, you have something to say?" His voice was quiet, almost gentle. I saw Danny nod his head. "Nu, what is it?" "It is written in the name of Rabbi Yaakov, not Rabbi Meir," Danny said quietly, in Yiddish. A whisper of approval came from the crowd. I glanced around quickly. Everyone was staring at Danny. Reb Saunders almost smiled. He nodded, and the long black beard went back and forth against his chest. Then I saw the thick black eyebrows arch upward, and the lids go about halfway down across his eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his arms still folded across his chest. "And nothing more?" he asked very quietly. Danny shook his head, a little hesitantly, I thought. "So," Reb Saunders said, sitting back in the leather chair, "there is nothing more." I looked at the two of them, wondering what was happening. What was this about Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Meir? "The words were said by Rabbi Yaakov, not by Rabbi Meir," Danny repeated. "Rabbi Yaakov, not Rabbi Meir, said, 'He who is walking by the way and studying, and breaks off his study, and—'" "Good," Reb Saunders broke in quietly. "The words were said by Rav Yaakov. Good. You saw it. Very good. And where is it found?" "In Pirkei Avos," Danny said. He was giving the Talmudic source for the quote. Many of the quotes Reb Saunders had used had been from Pirkei Avos, or Avat, as my father had taught me to pronounce it, with the Sephardic rather than the Ashkenazic rendering of the Hebrew letter Tov. I had recognized the quotes easily. Pirkei Avot is a collection of rabbinic maxims, and a chapter of it is studied by many Jews every Shabbat, between Passover and the Jewish New Year. "Nu," Reb Saunders said, smiling. "How should you not know that? Of course, good. Very good. Now tell me." As I sat there listening to what then took place between Danny and his father, I slowly realized what I was witnessing. In many Jewish homes, especially homes where there are yeshiva students and where the father is learned, there is a tradition which takes place on Shabbat afternoon. The father quizzes the son on what he has learned in school during the past week. I was witnessing a kind of public quiz, but a strange, almost bizarre quiz, more a contest than a quiz, because Reb Saunders was not confining his questions only to what Danny had learned during the week, but was ranging over most of the major tractates of the Talmud, and Danny was obviously required to provide the answers. Reb Saunders asked where else there was a statement about one who interrupts his studies, and Danny coolly, quietly answered. He asked what a certain medieval commentator had remarked about that statement, and Danny answered. He chose a minute aspect of the answer, and asked who had dealt with it in an altogether different way, and Danny answered. He asked whether Danny agreed with this interpretation, and Danny said he did not. He agreed with another medieval commentator who had given another interpretation. His father asked, how could the commentator have offered such an interpretation when in another passage in the Talmud he had said exactly the opposite? And Danny, very quietly, calmly, his fingers still playing with the rim of the paper plate, found a difference between the contradictory statements by quoting two other sources where one of the statements appeared in a somewhat different context, thereby nullifying the contradiction. One of the two sources Danny had quoted contained a biblical verse, and his father asked him who else had based a law upon this verse. Danny repeated a short passage from the tractate Sanhedrin, and then his father quoted another passage from Yoma, which contradicted the passage in Sanhedrin, and Danny answered with a passage from Gittin, which dissolved the contradiction. His father questioned the validity of his interpretation of the passage in Gittin by citing a commentary on the passage that disagreed with his interpretation, and Danny said it was difficult to understand this commentary. He did not say the commentary was wrong. He said it was difficult to understand it, because a parallel passage in Nedarim clearly confirmed his own interpretation. This went on and on until I lost track of the thread that held it all together, and sat and listened in amazement to the feat of memory I was witnessing. Both Danny and his father spoke quietly, his father nodding his approval each time Danny responded. Danny's brother sat staring at them with his mouth open, finally lost interest, and began to eat some of the food that was still on his plate. Once he started picking his nose, but stopped immediately. The men around the tables were watching as if in ecstasy, their faces glowing with pride. This was almost like the pilpul my father had told me about, except that it wasn't really pilpul. They were twisting the text out of shape. They seemed more interested in Bekut, the straightforward knowledge and simple explanations of the Talmudic passages and commentaries they were discussing. It went on like that for a long time. Then Reb Saunders sat back and was silent. The contest, or quiz, had apparently ended, and Reb Saunders was smiling at his son. He said very quietly, "Good, very good. There is no contradiction. But tell me, you have nothing more to say about what I said earlier?" Danny was suddenly sitting very straight. "Nothing more?" Reb Saunders asked again. "You have nothing more to say?" Danny shook his head, hesitantly. "Absolutely nothing more to say?" Reb Saunders insisted, his voice flat, cold, distant. He was no longer smiling. I saw Danny's body go rigid again, as it had done before his father began to speak. The ease and certainty he had worn during the Talmud quiz had disappeared. "So," Reb Saunders said, "there is nothing more. Nu, what should I say? I did not hear, you did not hear, you did not hear. You heard the first mistake, and you stopped listening. Of course you did not hear. How could you hear when you were not listening?" He said it quietly and without anger. Danny's face was rigid. The crowd sat silent. I looked at Danny. For a long moment he sat very still, and then I saw his lips part, move, curl slowly upward, and freeze into a grin. I felt the skin on the back of my neck begin to crawl, and I almost cried out. I stared at him, then looked quickly away. Reb Saunders sat looking at his son. Then he turned his eyes upon me. I felt his eyes looking at me. There was a long, dark silence, during which Danny sat very still, staring fixedly at his plate and grinning. Reb Saunders began to play with the earlock along the right side of his face. He caressed it with the fingers of his right hand, wound it around the index finger, released it, then caressed it again, all the time looking at me. Finally he sighed loudly, shook his head, and put his hands on the table. "Nu," he said, "it is possible I am not right. After all, my son is not a mathematician. He has a good head on him, but it is not a head for mathematics. But we have a mathematician with us. The son of David Malter is with us. He is a mathematician." He was looking straight at me, and I felt my heart pound and the blood drain from my face. "Reuven," Reb Saunders was saying, looking straight at me, "you have nothing to say?" I found I couldn't open my mouth. Say about what? I hadn't the faintest idea what he and Danny had been talking about. "You heard my little talk?" Reb Saunders asked me quietly. I felt my head nod. "And you have nothing to say?" I felt his eyes on me and found myself staring down at the table. The eyes were like flames on my face. "Reuven, you like the gematria?" Reb Saunders asked softly. I looked up and nodded. Danny hadn't moved at all. He just sat there grinning. His little brother was playing with the tomato again. and the men at the tables were silent, staring at me now. "I am very happy," Reb Saunders said gently. "You liked the gematria. Which gematria did you like?" I heard myself say, lamely and hoarsely, "They were all very good." Reb Saunders' eyebrows went up. "All?" he said. "A very nice thing. They were all very good. Reuven, were they all very good?" I felt Danny stir and saw him turn his head, the grin gone now from his lips. He glanced at me quickly, then looked down at his paper plate. I looked at Reb Saunders. "No," I heard myself say hoarsely. "They were not all good." There was a stir from the men at the tables. Reb Saunders sat back in his leather chair. "Nu, Reuven," he said quietly. "Tell me, which one was not good?" "One of the gematria was wrong," I said. I thought the world would fall in on me after I said that. I was a 15-year-old boy, and there I was telling Reb Saunders he had been wrong. But nothing happened. There was another stir from the crowd, but nothing happened. Instead, Reb Saunders broke into a warm, broad smile. "And which one was it?" he asked me quietly. "The gematria for Prosdor is 503, not 513, I answered. "Good, very good," Reb Saunders said, smiling and nodding his head, the black beard going back and forth against his chest, the earlock swaying. "Very good, Reuven. The gematria for Prosdor comes out 503. Very good." He looked at me, smiling broadly, his teeth showing white through the beard, and I almost thought I saw his eyes mist over. There was a loud murmur from the crowd, and Danny's body sagged as the tension went out of him. He glanced at me, his face a mixture of surprise and relief, and I realized with astonishment that I, too, had just passed some kind of test. "Nu," Reb Saunders said loudly to the men around the tables. "Say Kaddish." An old man stood up and recited the scholar's Kaddish. Then the congregants broke to go back to the front section of the synagogue for the evening service. Danny and I said nothing to each other throughout the service, and though I prayed the words, I did not know what I was saying. I kept going over what had happened at the table. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't get it through my head that Danny had to go through something like that every week, and that I myself had gone through it tonight. The followers of Reb Saunders obviously had been pleased with my performance, because I could see they were no longer staring questions at me, but were glancing at me admiringly. One of them, an old man with a white beard, who was sitting in my row, even nodded at me and smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. I had clearly passed the test. What a ridiculous way to gain admiration and friendship. The evening service was over very quickly, and afterward one of the younger men chanted the Havdalah, the brief service that marks the end of the Shabbat. Danny's brother held the braided candle, his hand trembling a little as the molten wax spilled onto his fingers. Then the congregants wished one another and Reb Saunders a good week, and began to leave the synagogue. It was late, and I thought my father would probably be worried about me by now, but I stood there and waited until the last congregant was gone, and the synagogue was empty, except for me, Danny, Reb Saunders, and the little boy. The synagogue seemed to me suddenly very small without its throng of black-hatted, black-bearded, black-caftanned men. Reb Saunders was stroking his beard and looking at Danny and me. He leaned an elbow upon the large podium, and then the hand that was stroking the beard began to play with an earlock. I heard him sigh, and I saw him shake his head slowly, his dark eyes moist and brooding. "Reuven, you have a good head on you," he said quietly in Yiddish. "I am happy my Daniel has chosen you for a friend. My son has many friends, but he does not talk about them the way he talks about you." I listened and said nothing. His voice was gentle, almost a caress. He seemed so altogether different now from the way he had been at the table. I glanced at Danny. He was looking at his father, and the rigid lines were gone from his face. Reb Saunders clasped his hands behind his back. "I know of your father," he said to me quietly. "I am not surprised you have such a head. Your father is a great scholar. But what he writes, what he writes." He shook his head. "I worry myself about my son's friends, especially if such a friend is the son of David Malter. What your father writes. Criticism. Scientific criticism. So when he tells me you are now his friend, I worry myself. The son of David Malter should be my Daniel's friend? But your father is an observer of the commandments, and you have his head, and so I am happy you are friends. It is good my Daniel has a friend. I have many responsibilities. I am not always able to talk to him." I saw Danny stare down at the floor, his face hardening. It is good he has acquired a friend, just so his friend does not teach him scientific criticism. Reb Saunders looked at me, his eyes dark and brooding. "You think a friend is an easy thing to be? If you are truly his friend, you will discover otherwise. We will see. Nu, it is late, and your father is certainly worried that you are away so long. Have a good week, Reuven, and come pray with us again. There will be no more mistakes in gematria." He was smiling broadly and warmly now, his eyes wrinkling at the corners, the hard lines of his face almost gone. And then he offered me his hand, his entire hand this time, not only the fingers, and I took it, and he held my hand a long time. I almost had the feeling he wanted to embrace me. Then our hands separated, and he went slowly up the aisle, his hands clasped behind his back, tall, a little stooped, and I thought, a little majestic. His young son trailed behind him, hanging on to the caftan. Danny and I remained alone in the synagogue. It occurred to me suddenly that not a single word had passed between him and his father all evening, except for the Talmud contest. "I'll walk you part of the way home," Danny offered, and we went out of the brownstone and down the stone stairway to the street. I could hear the caps of his shoes clearly against the stone of the stairway, and then again against the cement pavement of the sidewalk. It was night now, and cool, and a breeze blew against the sycamores and moved softly through the leaves. We walked in silence until Lee Avenue, then turned left. I was walking quickly, and Danny kept pace with my steps. Walking along Lee Avenue, Danny said quietly, "I know what you're thinking. You think he's a tyrant." I shook my head. "I don't know what to think. One minute he's a tyrant, the next minute he's kind and gentle. I don't know what to think." "He's got a lot on his mind," Danny said. "He's a pretty complicated person." "Do you always go through that routine at the table?" "Oh, sure. I don't mind it. I even enjoy it a little. I've never seen anything like it in my life." "It's a family tradition," Danny explained. "My father's father used to do it with him. It goes all the way back." "It would scare me sick." "It's not that bad. The bad part is waiting until he makes the mistake. After that, it's all right. But the mistakes aren't really very hard to find. He makes ones that he knows I can find. It's a kind of game almost." "Some game. The second mistake caught me off guard. But he made that one for you, really. That was very good the way you caught it. He knew I wouldn't catch it. He just wanted to catch me so he could tell me I wasn't listening. He was right. I wasn't listening. But I wouldn't have caught it even if I had listened. I'm no good in math. I've got a photographic memory for everything except math. You can't memorize math. You have to have a certain kind of head for it." "I hate to tell you what I think about that game," I said a little heatedly. "What happens if you miss the mistake?" "I haven't missed in years." "What happens when you do miss?" He was silent a moment. "It's uncomfortable for a while," he said quietly. "But he makes a joke or something, and we go into a Talmud discussion." "What a game," I said. "In front of all those people?" "They love it," Danny said. "They're very proud to see us like that. They love to hear the Talmud discussed like that. Did you see their faces?" "I saw them," I said. "How could I not see them? Does your father always use gematria when he talks?" "Not always. Very rarely, as a matter of fact. The people love it and always hope for it, but he does it rarely. I think he did it tonight only because you were there." "He's good at it, I'll say that much." "He wasn't too good tonight. Some of it was a little forced. He was fantastic a few months ago. He did it with Talmudic laws then. He was really great." "I thought it wasn't bad tonight." "Well, it wasn't too good. He hasn't been feeling too well. He worries about my brother." "What's wrong with your brother?" "I don't know. They don't talk about it. Something about his blood. He's been sick for a few years now." "I'm sorry to hear that, Danny." "He'll be all right. There's a pretty big doctor taking care of him now. He'll be all right." His voice had the same strange quality it had had when he had talked about his brother on our way over to the synagogue earlier in the day. Hope, wistfulness, almost an eagerness for something to take place. I thought Danny must love his little brother very much, though I didn't remember his saying a word to him all the time they had been together. "Anyway," Danny said, "these contests, as you call them, are going to end as soon as I start studying with Rav Gershenson." "Who?" "Rav Gershenson. He's a great scholar. He's at Hirsch College. He teaches Talmud there. My father says that when I'm old enough to study with Rav Gershenson, I'll be old enough for him not to worry whether I can catch him at mistakes or not. Then we'll just have the Talmud discussions. I'll like that." I was restraining my delight with considerable difficulty. The Samson Raphael Hirsch Seminary and College was the only yeshiva in the United States that offered a secular college education. It was located on Bedford Avenue, a few blocks from Eastern Parkway. My father had told me once that it had been built in the early 20s by a group of Orthodox Jews who wanted their sons to have both a Jewish and a secular education. Its college faculty was supposed to be excellent, and its rabbinic faculty consisted of some of the greatest Talmudists in the United States. A rabbinic ordination from its Talmud faculty was looked upon as the highest of Orthodox Jewish honors. It had been a foregone conclusion on my father's part, and on mine, that I would go on to there, after high school, for my bachelor's degree. When I told Danny that, his face burst into a smile. "Well, that's wonderful," he said. "I'm happy to hear that. That's really wonderful." "So we'll be going to the same college," I said. "Will you be going for a B.A.? "Sure, you have to. They don't let you study just Talmud in that college. I'll be majoring in psychology." We had come to the corner of the synagogue in which my father and I prayed. Danny stopped. "I have to go back," he said. "I've got schoolwork to do. I'll call you at your house tomorrow afternoon. I'll probably be in the library tomorrow afternoon doing some reading in psychology. Why don't you come over there?" "I won't be able to read anything." "Oh, that's right," Danny smiled. "I forgot. You didn't duck." "I'll come over anyway. I'll sit and think while you read." "Wonderful. I'd like to watch you sit and think." "McNagdim can think too, you know," I said. Danny laughed. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Right," I said, and I watched him walk away, tall and lean in his black caftan and black hat. I hurried home and came into the apartment just as my father was beginning to dial the phone. He put the phone down and looked at me. "Do you know what time it is?" he asked. "Is it very late?" I glanced at my watch. It was almost 10:30. "I'm sorry, Abba. I just couldn't walk out." "You were at Reb Saunders' synagogue all this time?" "Yes." "Next time you're out so late, you will call me, yes? I was ready to telephone Reb Saunders to find out what happened. Come into the kitchen and sit down. What are you looking so excited about? Sit down, I'll make some tea. Did you eat? What happened that you were away so long?" I sat at the kitchen table and slowly told my father everything that had taken place in Reb Saunders' synagogue. He sipped his tea and listened quietly. I saw him grimace when I began to go over the gematria. My father did not particularly care for gematria. He had once referred to it as nonsense numerology, and had said that anything could be proved that way. All that had to be done was to shift letters around adroitly, so as to make the values come out any way you wanted. So he sat there, tipping his tea and grimacing, as I reviewed Reb Saunders' gematria. When I started to tell him what had happened afterward, the grimace left his face, and he listened intently, nodding his head from time to time and sipping his tea. And when I got to the part where Reb Saunders had asked me about the wrong gematria, his face took on a look of astonishment, and he put the glass down on the table. Then I told him what Reb Saunders had said to me after Havdalah, and what Danny and I had talked about on his way home, and he smiled proudly and nodded to indicate his happiness. "Well," my father said, sipping his tea again, "you had some day, Reuven." "It was an experience, Abba. The way Danny had to answer his father's questions like that in front of everybody. I thought that was terrible." My father shook his head. "It is not terrible, Reuven. Not for Danny, not for his father, and not for the people who listened. It is an old tradition, this kind of Talmudic discussion. I have seen it many times between great rabbis, but it does not only take place between rabbis. When Kant became a professor, he had to follow an old tradition and argue in public on a philosophical subject. One day, when you are a professor in a university and read a paper before your colleagues, you will also have to answer questions. It is part of Danny's training." "But in public like that, Abba?" "Yes, Reuven, in public like that. How else would Reb Saunders' people know that Danny has a head for Talmud?" It just seemed so cruel to me. My father nodded. "It is a little cruel, Reuven, but that is the way the world is. If a person has a contribution to make, he must make it in public. If learning is not made public, it is a waste. But the business about mistakes I never heard before. That is something new. That is Reb Saunders' innovation. It is clear, but I am not sure I like it very much. No, I do not think I like it at all." "Danny said the mistakes are always easy to find." "Perhaps," my father said. "A man can do whatever he wishes to test his son's knowledge, but there are other ways than the way of Reb Saunders. At any rate, Reuven, it is good training for Danny. He will be involved in such things all his life." "Reb Saunders is a very complicated man, Abba. I can't make him out. One minute he's hard and angry, the next minute he's soft and gentle. I don't understand him." Reb Saunders is a great man, Reuben. Great men are always difficult to understand. He carries the burden of many people on his shoulders. I do not care for his Hasidism very much, but it is not a simple task to be a leader of people. Reb Saunders is not a fraud. He would be a great man even if he had not inherited his post from his father. It is a pity he occupies his mind only with Talmud. If he were not a tzaddik, he could make a great contribution to the world. But he lives only in his own world. It is a great pity. Danny will be the same way when he takes his father's place. It is a shame that a mind such as Danny's will be shut off from the world. My father sipped his tea again, and we sat quietly for a while. "I'm very proud of the way you handled yourself today," my father said, looking at me over the rim of the glass. "I am glad Reb Saunders will let you be Danny's friend. I was worried about Reb Saunders. I'm awfully sorry I came back so late, Abba." My father nodded. "I am not angry," he said. "But next time you will be so late. You will call, yes?" "Yes, Abba." My father glanced at the clock on the shelf over the refrigerator. "Reuven, it is late, and tomorrow you are going to school. You should go to sleep now." "Yes, Abba." "Remember, you must not read. I will read to you in the evenings, and we will see if we can study that way. But you must not read by yourself." "Yes, Abba." "Good night." "Good night, Reuven." I left him sitting at the kitchen table over his glass of tea and went to bed. I lay awake a long time before I was able to sleep. Chapter 8. When I got back to school the next morning, I found I had become a hero, and during the 15-minute morning recess, my friends, and even some boys I did not know, all crowded around me, wanting to know how I was and telling me what a great game I had played. Near the end of the recess, I went over to the pitcher's position and stood on the exact spot where I had been hit by the ball. I tried to look, the yard was crowded with students, at home plate, and imagined Danny standing there grinning at me. I remembered his grinning that way again yesterday, and I closed my eyes for a moment, then went over and stood near the wire fence behind the plate. The bench on which the young rabbi had sat was still there, and I stared at it for a moment. It seemed impossible to me that the ball game had taken place only a week ago. So many things had happened, and everything looked so different. Sidney Goldberg came over to me and started talking about the game, and then Davy Cantor joined us and added his opinion about those murderers. I nodded at what they were saying without really listening,